The worst betrayal isn't from strangers. It's when your own children honour someone else while you sit in silence. It was my birthday. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah were supposed to call. I waited all day. The phone stayed silent, a black brick on the kitchen table. My table was set for two, just a small piece of cake and a single candle. The cake was getting dry. I looked out the window. The neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Gable, were watering their flowers. They waved and I just gave a little nod. They couldn't know. They couldn't know my own son had forgotten me. I felt the shame burn. My whole body felt heavy. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. "He'll call soon," I whispered to myself, but the words felt like a lie. Every ring of the Gables' phone made my stomach clench. They talked and laughed on their front porch, so loud, so happy. They didn't have a silent house like mine. I put out the candle and walked to the window. The Gables were still outside, their porch light glowing. I could see a hint of something pink on their table. A gift? A flower? What was it they had that I didn't? Through my window, I watched the Gables receive the flowers meant for mothers who mattered. My heart twisted into a tight, hard knot. It was a big bouquet of pink roses, all tied up with a fancy ribbon. I knew who they were from. Their son. Their daughter-in-law. My breath caught in my throat. I had a flash of my son Daniel and his wife Sarah. They never sent me flowers. They never sent me anything. I watched Mrs. Gable take the flowers, her face lit up like a Christmas tree. She had the biggest smile. She put them in a vase right in the middle of her dining room table. A few minutes later, the Gables' grandson came running up to their front door. He hugged his grandma tightly. I imagined my own grandson, little Timmy, running to me like that, but he never did. Daniel and Sarah always kept him away. "Grandma's tired, Timmy," Sarah would say on the phone. "We'll visit another day." But another day never came. I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes. I walked away from the window and went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. My hands were shaking. I had a photo of Daniel on the fridge, a faded picture from his high school graduation. He looked so happy then, so full of life. It felt like a lifetime ago, a lifetime before Sarah came along, before I became a ghost in my own son's life. Why did it have to be this way? What did I do wrong? They sent perfume and praise to another woman while I drowned in silence. A few days after my birthday, a package came for Mrs. Gable. I saw the delivery man drop it off. My heart sank. I knew what it was before she even opened it. I saw the look on her face when she read the card. She showed the perfume bottle to her husband, Mr. Gable, and they both smiled. They were talking about Sarah. I heard the words, "so thoughtful," and "she's like our own." It was a stab to the heart. It wasn't enough that my son Daniel and his wife Sarah had forgotten me. They were now showering someone else with gifts and love, someone else's mother-in-law. My replacement, my own son, my flesh and blood, was giving all his love to a different family. He was a son to them, not me. I stood in my living room, the quiet feeling like a heavy blanket. The walls felt like they were closing in. I felt so alone. I thought about the last time I saw Daniel, at my husband's funeral. He was just a boy then. My boy. He had promised to take care of me. "I'll always be here, Mom," he had said, his voice cracking. Those words felt like a cruel joke now. They were a lie. A promise that was broken the moment he met her, the moment Sarah came into his life. How could a woman, a stranger, erase a mother's place in her own son's heart? The worst betrayal isn't from strangers, it's when your own children honour someone else while you sit in silence. It was my birthday. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah were supposed to call. I waited all day. The phone stayed silent, a black brick on the kitchen table. My table was set for two, just a small piece of cake and a single candle. The cake was getting dry. I looked out the window. The neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Gable, were watering their flowers. They waved, and I just gave a little nod. They couldn't know. They couldn't know my own son had forgotten me. I felt the shame burn. My whole body felt heavy. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. He'll call soon, I whispered to myself, but the words felt like a lie. Every ring of the Gables' phone made my stomach clench. They talked and laughed on their front porch, so loud, so happy. They didn't have a silent house like mine. I put out the candle and walked to the window. The Gables were still outside, their porch light glowing. I could see a hint of something pink on their table. A gift? A flower? What was it they had that I didn't? It wasn't just neglect, it was erasure, as if my husband's death had erased me too. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 5 years. He was the one who kept me connected to the world. He was the one who called our son Daniel every week and planned our visits. Now, without him, it was like I had become invisible. The silence in the house was a heavy blanket. The memories of him, of us, filled every room. I'd walk by his old armchair and feel a pang in my heart. Daniel and his wife Sarah never came over anymore. When I'd try to talk to them on the phone, Sarah's voice was always rushed. "We're so busy, Mum," she'd say. I'd look at the framed photo of me and Robert on the mantelpiece. His smile was so real, so full of love. He would never have let this happen. He would have told Daniel off. But Robert was gone, and with him went my place in the family. I was just a ghost, haunting my own life. How do you fight for a place in your own son's life when you feel like you've already disappeared? The worst betrayal isn't from strangers. It's when your own children honour someone else while you sit in silence. It was my birthday. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, were supposed to call. I waited all day. The phone stayed silent, a black brick on the kitchen table. My table was set for 2, just a small piece of cake and a single candle. The cake was getting dry. I looked out the window. The neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Gable, were watering their flowers. They waved and I just gave a little nod. They couldn't know. They couldn't know my own son had forgotten me. I felt the shame burn. My whole body felt heavy. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. "He'll call soon," I whispered to myself, but the words felt like a lie. Every ring of the Gables' phone made my stomach clench. They talked and laughed on their front porch, so loud, so happy. They didn't have a silent house like mine. I put out the candle and walked to the window. The Gables were still outside, their porch light glowing. I could see a hint of something pink on their table. A gift? A flower? What was it they had that I didn't? My son's line went dead before I could even say his name. I had finally gathered the courage to call him, my hand shaking as I dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times, and then my grandson, Timmy, answered. "Hello," he said, his voice so small and sweet. My heart leaped. "Timmy, it's Grandma," I said, my voice all shaky with hope. There was a long pause. Then I heard a muffled sound, like a hand being put over the phone. I could hear Timmy's little voice in the background, talking to his dad. A second later, my son, Daniel, took the phone. "Mum," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't the warm, happy sound of my boy. It was cold, like he was annoyed I had even called. I took a deep breath, trying to be strong. "Daniel," I started, "your sister said you think I'm too sensitive about the birthday." And that's when the call ended. Just a click. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. It was worse than not calling. It was like he was telling me he didn't want to hear my voice at all, that my feelings didn't matter. I stood there, phone in my hand, staring at the empty screen. My stomach was in a tight knot. It was so easy for him to just cut me off. So easy. What could a mother do when her own son wouldn't even listen? I gripped the counter, wondering how much silence a heart could carry. The quiet in my house felt so loud now. My son Daniel's quick hang-up had filled the rooms with a new kind of pain. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing a single mug. The water was hot, but my hands felt like ice. I looked out the window at the little bird on the feeder. It was singing, so carefree. I wished my heart could feel that way, free of this heaviness. I thought back to the last time my husband Robert had been here. He'd be telling me a joke right now, making me laugh. But he was gone, and with him, the laughter was gone too. Daniel and his wife Sarah had taken over his job of keeping the family together. Only they had done the opposite. They had pushed me away. The betrayal was like a sickness inside me. It had spread from my birthday to my phone calls, and now it was a part of everything. I was so tired of being alone, tired of the silence. I wasn't just grieving for my husband anymore. I was grieving for the family I had lost, the family that had left me behind. This wasn't just sadness. It was a deep, aching wound that wouldn't heal. It was like they had taken my life and my happiness with them. What was I supposed to do now that I had no one? I couldn't stay in the house anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. The quiet was too loud. I pulled on my coat, a grey one I'd had for years, and left. The air was cold, but it felt good against my face, a sharp wake-up call. I walked past the grocery store where I used to go with my husband, Robert. I saw a young couple holding hands, laughing, and my heart ached. I kept walking. I wasn't going anywhere special, just getting away from the silent house and the pain inside it. The pain from my son Daniel and his wife Sarah. I felt so angry. My own son, my flesh and blood, had hung up on me. He chose his life with Sarah over me. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. I just walked, the cold seeping into my bones. I thought about the nice perfume and flowers they sent their other mother-in-law. What did she do that I didn't? What was so special about her that they gave her all the love I was supposed to have? I felt so small, so invisible. Was I too much of a burden? Was I too old? Why did they want me gone? It was more than just being forgotten. It was being replaced. And that felt like the deepest cut of all. They thought I was someone's honoured guest. When I told the truth, the room froze. It was the annual church potluck. I hadn't planned on going, but the quiet of my house was too much to bear. I brought a bowl of my famous potato salad, the same one my husband Robert used to love. As I walked into the noisy fellowship hall, a woman I didn't know smiled at me. "Oh, you must be Sarah's mother. We've heard so much about you," she said, her voice so friendly. My heart stopped. Sarah, my son Daniel's wife, was here, and she had told them I was coming. My face must have been a puzzle. The woman pointed to an empty chair at a table full of people. "She said you were her special guest today." My hands started to shake. The plate of potato salad felt heavy. I didn't know what to say. The lie was so big, so bold. I had to tell the truth. I couldn't let them think I was loved and celebrated. "I'm not Sarah's mother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The smile on the woman's face fell. The people at the table stopped talking. The laughter in the room faded. I felt the shame burn in my cheeks. I just stood there, caught in her lie, wishing I could disappear. What was she trying to do? Was this some kind of sick joke? A new way to humiliate me in front of everyone? "Sit with us," a woman said, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. After I told the truth, the room felt like it was humming with whispers. People kept their eyes down, pretending not to notice me standing there like a fool with my bowl of potato salad. I wanted to turn around and run right out the door, but my feet were stuck. Then, a kind voice broke through the silence. "That's a lovely potato salad," a woman with soft grey hair said. She was standing at a nearby table with two other older women. She smiled, a real gentle smile. "My name is Margaret. Please sit with us." She pulled out an empty chair. I hesitated, but her eyes were so kind. I walked over and sat down, placing my bowl on the table. The other women, Joyce and Betty, nodded in welcome. We didn't talk about what happened, we talked about the potluck food. They asked me about my potato salad. and I told them it was my husband Robert's favourite. Margaret said her husband, who was gone too, had loved her apple pie. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was a ghost. I was just a woman, talking with other women, sharing a meal. The feeling of being seen again, even by strangers, felt like a lifeline. Was this what it felt like to be a part of something again? Other mothers whispered their own wounds, forgotten, ignored, discarded. As we ate, the talk turned from food to family. Margaret, the kind woman who had asked me to sit with them, spoke first. "My son's family moved to California last year," she said, "and they don't even have time to send a postcard." Betty nodded. "My daughter only calls when she needs money," she added, her voice full of a quiet sadness. Then Joyce told a story about her grandchildren coming to town but staying with the other grandma. "They just pretended I wasn't even there," she said, her eyes looking down at her plate. I just listened, my heart aching with a new kind of understanding. Their stories were like a mirror. I wasn't the only one. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah weren't the only ones doing this. It was a pattern, a quiet sickness that was happening to so many of us widows. Margaret looked at me and squeezed my hand. "It's like once our husbands are gone, we become a problem to them. A burden." Her words hit me hard. A burden. Was that what I was? An old sad burden to my own son? This wasn't just my pain anymore, it was theirs too. It was a secret club of hurt mothers. But seeing their strength, the way they still laughed and carried on, gave me a new kind of feeling. Could I be strong like them? What if this was the beginning of my fight? The hymn about honouring parents felt like mockery when sung by children who didn't know mine. After the potluck, I went to church with my new friends, Margaret, Joyce and Betty. The pastor was talking about family, and the children's choir came out. They started singing a song about honouring your mother and father. The sweet little voices echoed in the quiet church. I looked at the little faces, so innocent. My mind went to my son Daniel and his wife Sarah. I thought about how they had forgotten my birthday, how Daniel hung up on me, how Sarah lied to the people at the potluck. It all felt like a big, ugly joke. The words of the song were so beautiful, but they felt like sharp little knives digging into my heart. I wanted to scream, "Don't you see? It's not like that for everyone. My children don't honour me." But I just sat there, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to hold back the tears. It was a kind of pain you couldn't show, the kind that made you feel like a fake, the kind of pain that made you want to run and hide. But where could I hide from the truth? What could I do when even God's house felt like a place of shame? I swore I wouldn't cry in front of them, but my voice betrayed me. After the church service, everyone was shaking hands. I was standing with Margaret and Joyce talking about the sermon. Margaret looked at me. "You seem sad, honey," she said, her voice soft. The question was so simple, so kind, it broke something inside me. I had been holding back the tears for so long. All the pain, all the silence, all the loneliness came rushing to the surface. I looked down, my throat getting tight. It's just hard," I said, my voice cracking. I couldn't stop it. A single tear rolled down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, but it was too late. Joyce and Margaret saw it. Margaret put an arm around me. "We know," she whispered. Her words were so simple, but they meant everything. For the first time, I felt like someone understood. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. It wasn't just my husband's death that made me cry. It was my son Daniel and his wife Sarah who had made my life so painful. I stood there letting the tears fall, a little bit of the heavy weight lifting from my chest. Could these strangers really become my family? How could they treat her like that? Someone asked loud enough to echo. It was later that afternoon after church. I was walking home with my new friends, Margaret and Joyce. We were on the sidewalk talking about my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah. I was telling them about the birthday and the phone call. I was telling them the whole truth. Suddenly a car slowed down beside us. It was a man I recognized from the church, a neighbor who lived a few streets over. He rolled down his window. "I just wanted to say," he said, "I overheard what happened at the potluck. I'm so sorry." My heart stopped. So they did know. The whole church knew. The public shame I had tried so hard to hide was out there for everyone to see. He looked at me, his eyes full of pity, and then he looked at the women with me. "How could they treat her like that?" he asked. The question hung in the air. He wasn't talking about my friends, he was talking about Daniel and Sarah. He was asking them. It felt like a public accusation against my own family. The car drove away, but the question echoed in my mind. How could they? How could my own son and his wife do this? It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times, and now it was out loud for everyone to hear. By the next morning, my absence from my children's tables had become the town's gossip. I woke up with a heavy heart. I didn't want to face anyone. I knew what they were all thinking. The whispers at church, the neighbours' public question. It was all out there now. I walked to the grocery store to get a few things, and I could feel people looking. Mrs. Gable, my next-door neighbour, saw me from her yard. She waved with a tight little smile. She probably knew the whole story by now. Everyone knew my son Daniel and his wife Sarah had left me out. The shame of it felt like a brand on my forehead. I went inside the store, but I couldn't focus on the food. I just wanted to hide. I overheard 2 women talking in the canned goods aisle. "Did you hear about Mrs. Miller?" one of them whispered. "Her own son." The rest was lost, but I didn't need to hear it. I knew they were talking about me, about Daniel, about how he had chosen someone else's family over his own mother. It was no longer a secret. My family's betrayal was now public knowledge. And what could I do about that? My son finally called, not to apologize, but to scold me for embarrassing him. I was sitting at my kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee when the phone rang. My heart jumped. It was Daniel. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. "Mum, what did you do?" he said, his voice cold and sharp. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Everyone at church is talking," he said. "They said you told them we weren't celebrating your birthday with you. You're making us look bad." My hands started to shake. He wasn't calling to say sorry. He was calling to yell at me for telling the truth. "But you didn't call, Daniel," I said, my voice rising a little. "You forgot my birthday." He was quiet for a second. "That's not the point," he said. "The point is, you don't air our family business to strangers. You embarrassed Sarah and me." The words felt like a slap in the face. All my pain, all my loneliness. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was his reputation. He didn't care that he had hurt me. He only cared that people knew. My son was more worried about his public image than his own mother's heart. How could I make him see my pain when he was so blinded by his own selfishness? That was the moment I chose survival over begging. I would stand even if alone. My son Daniel's call had been a cold, hard slap of reality. It wasn't about him being busy or confused. It was about him not caring about my feelings at all. I hung up the phone. My hand still ached from holding it so tightly. I walked to the living room and sat in my husband Robert's old armchair. I looked at the photos on the mantelpiece. My son Daniel as a boy, my husband and me on our wedding day. All those memories felt so far away. For a long time I had been begging. I begged for a phone call. I begged for a visit. I begged to be a part of their lives. But what good was it doing? It was only making me more and more miserable. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. I was a strong woman. I had raised a son. I had loved a good man, and I had faced the world as a widow for 5 years. I would not beg for scraps of love from my own child. The power had been all with Daniel and Sarah. They held all the cards. But I was done playing their game. From now on, I would find my own way. My heart felt a little lighter, even if I was completely alone. What did a new life look like without my son in it? If they wanted silence, I would give them a story too loud to ignore. My son, Daniel, thought he could shame me into silence, but his plan backfired. He had made our family problem a public one, and now I would use that. I went back to the church fellowship hall for the women's group, a little nervous but also with a fire in my belly. My new friends, Margaret and Joyce, were there. The room was buzzing with women drinking coffee and eating cookies. I saw a few people glance at me, probably remembering the potluck mistake. But this time I wouldn't hide. I sat down next to Margaret and took a deep breath. "Today we're talking about our faith in hard times," the group leader said. Every single time before this I would have said my faith was strong even when it wasn't. But not today. Today I was going to be honest. Daniel and Sarah had made me feel small for too long. I was going to change the power between us. They wanted to control the story, but I was going to take it back. What would happen when I told my truth, out loud, for everyone to hear? At the women's group, I finally said it. My children gave me nothing. The leader asked if anyone had a story to share. My hands got sweaty. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked at Margaret, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. I raised my hand. The room went quiet. I started with my birthday. I told them about the quiet phone, the empty table. I told them about my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, giving flowers and perfume to someone else. I told them about my daughter's sharp words on the phone. And then I just said it. The words came out without me even thinking. On my birthday, my children gave me nothing. The sentence hung in the air, heavy and true. There were gasps around the room. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The secret I had been carrying for so long was finally out. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't pretending everything was fine. It wasn't fine. And now everyone knew it. My son Daniel had wanted to scold me for embarrassing him, but now I had truly embarrassed him. Was I being too cruel? Or was this the only way to finally heal? It wasn't just sympathy I heard. It was anger on my behalf. After I told my story about my son Daniel and his wife Sarah, a wave of sound moved through the room. It was gasps, and then murmurs, and then angry whispers. One woman, a lady named Carol with a kind face, stood up. "That is just awful," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "How could a son do that to his own mother?" Others started to chime in. "That's not right," another woman said. "It's a disgrace." I had expected pity. I had expected sad looks and soft hugs. But I didn't expect this fire, this anger on my behalf. It was like a group of mothers had suddenly come together to protect me. They didn't just feel sorry for me. They felt angry for me. It was like they were seeing my pain and feeling it too. The feeling was powerful. It wasn't just my fight anymore. My story had become their story. The betrayal I had faced was something they all understood. I looked at the faces around me, and I saw a new kind of strength. I wasn't just an old widow anymore. I was a part of a group of women who had each other's backs. My power was growing. What would my son Daniel do when he found out I had so many people on my side? One neighbour told another, and soon the whole block knew. After I spoke at the women's group, I felt a new kind of power. My story was out and I wasn't ashamed anymore. But I knew there would be a price to pay. The next day I was out in my garden, watering my flowers, when Mrs. Gable, my next-door neighbour, came to her fence. She didn't have her usual fake smile. "I heard you told your group about your son, Daniel," she said, her voice low. I just looked at her. "I have no secrets anymore, Mrs. Gable." She gave a little sigh. "Well, you made a big mistake. Now everyone knows, people are talking." I knew they were. I could almost hear the whispers. It was my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Daniel, who had made this a public thing in the first place. I was just fighting back. It felt good, even if it was a little scary. My story was spreading like wildfire. They had their fancy flowers and perfume. But I had the truth, a truth that was a lot more powerful, and I wasn't done telling it. What would happen when my son found out just how much I had said? When the pastor asked if I'd been honoured, the truth slipped from my lips in front of dozens. It was Sunday again, and I was at church. I felt a new kind of confidence. I wasn't hiding anymore. After the service, the pastor was greeting people at the door. He was a kind man, and he looked at me with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "it's so good to see you. How was your birthday celebration? I hope your family honoured you." The question was simple, but my heart started to pound. He was asking me about my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, right in front of everyone. It was a chance to lie and make everything seem normal again. But I had promised myself I wouldn't do that. I looked him right in the eyes. "Pastor, my family gave me nothing," I said, my voice clear and steady. The smile fell from his face. His eyebrows went up in surprise. Dozens of people were standing there listening. A woman behind me gasped. The pastor didn't say anything for a second. The air was thick with shock. I had said it out loud again. I had told the truth, and it felt like I had a new kind of power. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a fighter. How would my son, Daniel, react when he heard what I had done? "How dare you embarrass us like this?" she hissed over the phone. The phone call came a few hours after I got home from church. It wasn't my son, Daniel. It was my daughter-in-law, Sarah. Her voice was sharp and full of fury. "My mother-in-law, Mrs. Gable, just called me," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "She said you were at the church telling everyone that we don't care about you. She said the pastor himself was shocked." My hand gripped the phone tightly. "Is it not true, Sarah?" I asked, my voice calm. "You didn't call me on my birthday. Daniel didn't call me. You didn't give me anything." She didn't answer. Instead, she kept on yelling, "You're a mean old woman. You're trying to ruin us. We told everyone how wonderful you were, and you just went and made us look bad." She was so angry, she wasn't even making sense. I was just telling the truth that they had made public. "I'm not the one who started this, Sarah," I said softly. "You did." She was quiet for a second, and then she hung up on me. My heart was pounding. I had done it. I had fought back. But what would happen next? What would Daniel do when he found out what I had done? Was this the end of our family? Some defended me, others excused my children, but no one stayed neutral anymore. The phone call with my daughter-in-law, Sarah, had made it clear. The public truth had created a storm. My new friends at church, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty, were on my side. They saw the injustice of it all. "You did the right thing," Margaret told me over the phone. But others in town saw it differently. I heard from a friend that some people were saying I was just an old woman causing trouble. "They say Daniel and Sarah are just busy," my friend said, "and that you should be more understanding." I felt the familiar sting of betrayal. It was hard to hear people make excuses for my son, Daniel. It was like they were taking his side without knowing the whole story. I had to face the whispers and the pity everywhere I went. I was no longer just a quiet old widow. I was a local story, a scandal. My family had made me a public figure of their betrayal. The town was now a chessboard, and I was a pawn in their game. But I wasn't just a pawn anymore. I was ready to move. What was the next step in this very public fight? A young reporter asked me if I would go on record. My hands trembled, but I said yes. I was at the grocery store getting milk and bread when a young woman with a notebook came up to me. She was so young, maybe in her 20s. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked. "My name is Emily. I'm a reporter for the local paper. I heard what happened at the church and the potluck. The whispers are all over town." I felt my heart drop. The story had gone from whispers to the newspaper. "I wanted to ask you," she said softly. "Would you be willing to tell your story? On the record?" My hands started to tremble. This wasn't just a rumour anymore. This was big. This was permanent. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, would see it in print. It felt so final. I thought about all the silent years, all the forgotten birthdays, all the pain. I looked at this young woman's hopeful face. She saw me. She saw my pain. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, "I will tell my story." The word felt so strong. I was going to tell the whole world the truth. What would it feel like to see my pain printed in black and white for everyone to read? The headline read, "Forgotten on Mother's Day, a widow's silence speaks." The newspaper came out on Saturday. I walked down to the newsstand to get a copy. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unfold the paper. I found the page with my story on it. The headline was in big, bold letters. "Forgotten on Mother's Day, a widow's silence speaks." I started to read it. The reporter, Emily, had written my story exactly as I told her. She wrote about the empty table on my birthday, my son Daniel and his wife Sarah, giving flowers to another mother, the cold phone call, and my decision to speak out. It was all there, my whole story, all my pain, printed for the whole town to see. I stood there holding the newspaper, and I didn't feel ashamed. I felt powerful. I had taken my story back. It wasn't just a rumour anymore. It was the truth, and it was official. I knew the phone would ring soon. I knew Daniel and Sarah would be furious. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. What would they do now that I had told the whole town? I never mentioned them directly, but everyone knew who my children were. The newspaper was out and my story was public. The reporter, Emily, was smart. She wrote about a local widow and her children. But everyone in town knew. They knew I was Mrs. Miller, and they knew my son was Daniel and his wife was Sarah. They knew because of the potluck, because of the church, because of the whispers. My story was now a public truth. I saw people in the grocery store reading the paper and looking at me. They would give me a little nod or a kind smile. Some people looked away, maybe because they were uncomfortable, or maybe because they felt guilty for judging me before. I wasn't just a sad old lady anymore. I was the woman in the paper, the one who was brave enough to speak her truth. It was a strange feeling. I was still alone in my house, but I felt like I had an army of people in my heart, an army of people who read my story and knew my pain. My children's names were not in the paper, but their shame was. I had found a way to fight back without even saying their names out loud. But I knew the real fight was about to begin. How would they react when they saw their own betrayal printed for all to see? My children's rage poured out in calls, threats, pleas and ultimatums all at once. The newspaper came out and the phone started ringing. It was Daniel. "Mom, what did you do?" he yelled. "You put our business in the paper. We're a laughingstock." He was so angry he could barely speak. Then Sarah got on the phone. "You're a sick old woman," she screamed. "You're a liar. We'll never speak to you again." I just listened. I didn't say a word. Their words were like a storm, full of thunder and lightning. They told me I was a bitter old lady, and that I was crazy. They said they wouldn't let me see my grandson Timmy ever again. They were trying to scare me, to make me feel guilty, but their anger was a sign that my plan had worked. I had taken away their power. I had told the truth, and they couldn't stand it. "You have until tomorrow to call the paper and tell them you lied," Daniel said, his voice cold. "Or you'll never hear from us again." I hung up the phone. Their threats used to hurt me, but now they just felt empty. They had already cut me out of their lives. What did I have to lose? What would happen when I didn't call the newspaper? They tried to smear me as bitter, ungrateful, unstable. But the town didn't buy it. After my children's furious phone calls, I knew what they were doing. They were telling everyone I was crazy. A family friend called me, her voice full of pity. "Your son, Daniel, called us," she said. "He said you're not well, that you're making things up because you're lonely." I just sighed. It was their last desperate move. They were trying to ruin my reputation in the town, to make people think I was an old bitter woman who couldn't be trusted. They were trying to win back the public's sympathy. But it didn't work. The kindness of the town was stronger than their lies. My new friends from the church, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty were all on my side. The neighbours who saw me every day knew I wasn't making things up. The pastor knew. The people at the grocery store knew. My children thought they could control the story, but the truth was already out. My pain was public, and my strength was too. I had a whole town standing by me. The shame and betrayal that had once been my children's secret weapon were now my source of power. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. But what was my next step in this very public war? At the town council, someone stood and said, "This isn't just her story, it's ours." The newspaper article had a bigger impact than I ever could have imagined. I decided to go to the town council meeting that night. My new friends from the women's group, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty, came with me. We sat in the back just listening, but I could feel people looking at me. They knew. The mayor was talking about a new road when a woman from the audience, a stranger to me, stood up. "Excuse me, Mayor," she said, her voice shaky but strong. "I read the newspaper article about Mrs. Miller. This isn't just her story. It's happening to many of us." The mayor looked confused, but the woman kept going. "Our children forget us, they ignore us. We are treated like a burden." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then I heard it. A quiet murmur of agreement. The woman had said what so many of us felt but were afraid to say. My private pain was now a public problem. My fight with my son Daniel and his wife Sarah was bigger than just us. I was a symbol for every forgotten mother in this town. It was a terrifying but powerful feeling. Would my children finally see what they had done? One by one, other women stood, voices cracking as they told their own neglect. After the first woman spoke, a few other women in the room started to stand up. An older woman with a cane stood up and told a story about her son not calling her for 2 years. Another woman, a neighbour of mine, talked about her daughter-in-law, who told her she was too much work to visit. The stories tumbled out, one after another, all of them so different but all of them so much the same. A man even stood up and talked about his elderly mother who lived in a nursing home and never had visitors. The anger and sadness in the room was so thick you could almost touch it. I looked at my friends, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty, and they were all crying. The betrayal that my son Daniel and his wife Sarah had done to me was now just one part of a bigger story. The stories of neglect, of children who had forgotten their parents. It was a secret club of hurt that was now out in the open. I felt a new kind of strength. I wasn't just a sad, lonely widow anymore. I was a part of something big, something that was finally being talked about. What would my children do when they saw their own names as a part of a much bigger problem? "If you keep this up, you'll lose us forever," they said. Too late. They already lost me. The phone rang as soon as I got home from the town council meeting. It was my son, Daniel. His voice was shaking, but not with anger this time. It was with fear. "Mum, what is happening?" he said. "The mayor called me. He said you were at the meeting and people were yelling about how we treat you. This has to stop." His wife, Sarah, was on the other line too. "If you don't stop this, you're going to lose us forever," she said, her voice hard. I was quiet for a second and then I just laughed. A short, sad laugh. "Lose you?" I said. "You already lost me. You lost me on my birthday when you didn't call. You lost me when you gave flowers to someone else. You lost me when you hung up the phone on me." The silence on their end was loud. They had threatened me for so long, and it had worked. But now I wasn't afraid. I had nothing to lose. They had already taken everything. They had taken my family and my trust and my son. The power had finally changed. They didn't have anything to hold over me anymore. "The only thing I have left to lose is my own story," I said. "And I'm not going to let you have that too." What would they do when their last threat failed? What would they do when they realized they had nothing left? He came to my door saying, "The truth has a way of setting fire, not just setting free." I was sitting on my porch swing, watching the world go by, when I saw the pastor walking up my driveway. I was surprised. He hadn't just come to my house since my husband, Robert, passed away. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "May I come in, Mrs. Miller?" he asked. We sat in my living room, the one with all the old family photos. He didn't talk about the church meeting. He didn't talk about my son, Daniel, or my daughter-in-law, Sarah. He just looked at me. "Your story," he said softly. "It has opened up a wound in this town. People are angry. Some are hurt." I nodded. I had seen it. "I wanted to tell you," he continued. "The truth has a way of setting fire, not just setting free." His words were a warning. I had felt free after telling my story, but I hadn't thought about the fire, about the harm it could cause. He wasn't telling me to stop. He was just telling me to be careful. My heart felt heavy. Had I done the right thing? Had I gone too far? What would happen when the fire I had started spread even more? The young reporter wanted to go deeper. "Can I ask about your husband, about the family history?" The next day, the reporter, Emily, called me. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice full of excitement. "The story is the talk of the town. People are really connecting with it." I felt a little proud, a little scared. "I've been asked to do a bigger story," she said. "A series. Can I ask you some more questions? Can I ask about your husband, Robert? About your family's history?" My heart skipped a beat. She was digging deeper. She wanted to know everything. I had told her the story of my pain, but I hadn't told her the whole story of my family. My husband, Robert, was a good man, but he had his own secrets. Secrets that I had kept buried for years. Secrets about my son, Daniel, and a family fight that had happened long ago. I told her I would think about it. I hung up the phone and just sat there, my mind racing. My husband's death had always felt like the beginning of my pain, but maybe the roots went back further. Was I ready to open up old wounds, wounds that I had tried so hard to forget? In the back of my closet, dust-covered, sat letters I swore I'd never open again. After the phone call with Emily, I went to my bedroom closet. In the very back, on the highest shelf, was a small, worn box. It was covered in dust. I pulled it down, the old cardboard feeling fragile in my hands. I hadn't touched it since the day my husband, Robert, died. Inside were old letters, yellowed with time. Letters from him. I opened the top one, my hands shaking. The letter was from the night he died. A note he wrote to me, to our son Daniel, and our daughter Sarah. I had read it once and put it away, too hurt to ever look at it again. But now, with the reporter's questions and the pastor's warnings, I felt like I had to. I had to face the past. I had to know the truth. I started to read his words. His handwriting was shaky. He was writing about our family, about a big secret, a lie that had torn us apart a long time ago. The note wasn't about love. It was about regret. It was about something my husband Robert had done. And as I read the words, I started to understand that my son, Daniel's betrayal was not new. It was a part of a much bigger, older story. A story I had buried for years. What was this secret my husband was writing about? And what did it have to do with the pain I was in now? He found inconsistencies in my children's stories and a missing piece about my late husband. The young reporter, Emily, called me the next day, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "I've been talking to a lot of people in town about your story. Something isn't right." My heart started to beat faster. She told me she had talked to some of my son Daniel's friends. They told her that Daniel had been acting strange for a while, not just since my story came out, but for years. She said his story about being busy didn't add up. Then she asked about my husband, Robert. She found out he had sold a big part of his land before he died. But the records were sealed. It was a secret he had kept from me. "There's something missing," she said. "Something about your husband and a part of the family history no one talks about." My hands started to shake. I had thought my pain began with my husband's death, but maybe it had started long ago. What was this secret my husband had kept? What was my son Daniel hiding? I felt a knot in my stomach. Was there a dark secret in my family's past that explained everything? The town began asking, "What are they hiding?" Louder than my children could deny. After the reporter, Emily, started digging, the whispers in town changed. It wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah. People were asking questions. I overheard a man at the gas station talking to his friend. "I heard Mrs. Miller's husband sold all his land to someone and no one knows who," he said. "And the kids are acting so guilty about it." The man's friend nodded. "Yeah. What are they hiding? Why are they so angry she's telling the truth?" The whispers were no longer about my embarrassment. They were about my children's secrets. Their public shame was now turning into public questions. My son, Daniel, tried to tell people that I was lying, that I was just an old woman who was not well. But the town didn't believe him. The truth was out, and my children's own stories were now filled with holes. It was like I was a detective, and all the clues were right in front of me. The power had changed completely. Now, I was not the one being questioned. What would my children do now that the town was on my side? The council asked me to speak at the community gathering, this time with everyone watching. After the newspaper article and the town council meeting, I became a symbol, not just for forgotten mothers, but for a whole town that was tired of secrets. The mayor called me himself. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "we're holding a community gathering this Friday at the town hall. We want to talk about how we can support our elderly. We would be honoured if you would speak. It's a very big crowd." My heart was pounding. This wasn't a small church meeting. This was the whole town. This was my biggest chance to tell my story, to make a real change. But it was also my biggest risk. If I spoke, my son Daniel and his wife Sarah would hear me. My story would be known by every single person in this town. It would be impossible for them to ever lie again. I was scared, but I was also ready. I had been invisible for so long. Now I had a chance to be seen. I had a chance to change things for other widows who had no one. "Yes," I said, "I will speak." I had come so far from the woman who sat alone at her kitchen table. I was no longer a victim. I was a fighter. How would my children react when they knew I was going to tell my truth to the entire town? She warned me, "If you speak, don't ever call me your daughter again." The call from my daughter Sarah came as I was getting ready for the town meeting. Her voice was cold, sharp, and full of hate. "I heard you're speaking tonight," she said, not even bothering to say hello. "If you go up there and you talk about us, I swear you'll never see me again. Don't ever call me your daughter again." My heart ached, but it wasn't a new pain. It was an old one. She had threatened me with this for a long time. She had already cut me out of her life. Her words were just a final, desperate warning. I took a deep breath. "You are not my daughter," I said, my voice steady. "My daughter would never be ashamed of me. She would stand up for me. You are just a mean woman who married my son." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. My hands were shaking, but I felt a new kind of power. She had tried to scare me, but all she did was make me stronger. She had given me nothing to lose. What would she do when I told the whole town the truth? My knees shook, but the eyes of forgotten mothers lined the street behind me. I put on my best dress, the one my husband Robert had bought for me. My hands were shaking. I was so scared. This was the biggest thing I had ever done. My son, Daniel, and his wife Sarah would be watching, and so would everyone else. I walked out my front door, and to my surprise, I wasn't alone. My new friends from the church, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty, were waiting for me on the sidewalk. They each took one of my hands. I looked down the street and I saw more women. Women from the women's group, women from the grocery store. Their faces were kind and brave. They were all there for me. They had read the newspaper. They had heard my story, and now they were walking with me. We didn't talk. We just walked in a quiet line, a long line of mothers who had been forgotten. Their eyes were on me, and I felt their strength. My knees stopped shaking. I wasn't just walking alone anymore. I was walking for all of us. I had a whole town standing behind me. How could my children think I was just a bitter old lady now? I gripped the microphone and whispered, "This is not just my story, it's ours." We walked into the town hall, and the room was packed. Every seat was full. I saw the mayor at the front, and I saw the young reporter Emily with her notebook. I walked up to the stage, my friends right behind me. The room went silent. The lights were so bright I couldn't see anyone's face, but I could feel all their eyes on me. I gripped the microphone. My hands were still shaking a little. I had a speech planned, all the things I was going to say. But when I looked out at the silent faces, the words went away. The words of my son Daniel and his wife Sarah came to my mind, their threats, their lies. But then I looked at my friends in the front row, and I thought about the line of mothers who had walked with me. I leaned into the microphone. "This is not just my story," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "It's ours." The whisper felt like a shout. The crowd was so silent. And then a woman in the back of the room started clapping, and then another. And then the whole room. They were clapping for me and they were clapping for themselves. My voice was a voice for all of them. My story was no longer just a private pain. It was a public battle cry. And what would my children do now that I had an army of forgotten mothers standing with me? My children stood up mid-speech, their voices sharp with denial. "She's exaggerating!" I was up on the stage, the applause still ringing in my ears. I was just about to start my story, to tell the whole town about my pain and my strength, when a voice from the back of the room cut through the air. "She's exaggerating!" My heart stopped. It was my daughter-in-law, Sarah. She was standing with my son, Daniel. His face was red with anger. "She's not telling the truth!" he yelled, his voice full of rage. The whole room went quiet. I could feel all their eyes on me. My hands started to shake. I had told my story to the whole town, and now my children were standing there, calling me a liar. "She's a bitter old woman!" Sarah screamed. "She's just making this up!" My heart ached. I had been so brave, and now they were trying to tear me down in front of everyone. They were trying to take away my power. My stomach was in a tight knot. I didn't know what to do. My voice, which had just been so strong, felt like it was gone. Would anyone believe me now that my own children were calling me a liar? The silence that followed was broken by whispers, this time not against me, but for me. The room was so quiet after my children's outburst. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah stood there, their faces full of hate. I was frozen. I didn't know what to say. But then the whispers started. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the energy. It wasn't angry. It was soft and kind. I saw a few people looking at my children, then looking back at me with sympathy. The people weren't on their side. They were on mine. I had told my truth, and it had spread all over town. My children's anger and yelling had made them look guilty. The people didn't believe them. I felt a little wave of relief. My words were still strong. The power was still mine. I looked at my son, Daniel, and he looked away. He couldn't stand to look at me, at the truth. My story was so much bigger than them now. What would they do when they knew their anger and yelling had made me even stronger? Neighbours rose one by one, describing what they had seen, confirming what my children tried to hide. I was still standing there, a little confused, when a man stood up. He was my neighbour, Mr. Gable, the same man who I had waved at from my window. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm a little nervous. But I'm a neighbour of Mrs. Miller. I saw the flowers, the pink roses. They weren't for her." His wife, Mrs. Gable, stood up too. "I saw them," she said. "They were for me, from my daughter-in-law, Sarah. She told us they were for me. It was a lovely gift." The crowd started to murmur. The whispers were getting louder now. Then a woman from the church stood up. "I saw them at the potluck," she said. "Mrs. Miller told the truth. Sarah told me she was her special guest. She lied." One by one, people stood up. Neighbours, friends from church, people who had just seen me at the grocery store. They were all telling the truth. They were all defending me. I felt the tears come to my eyes. My children had tried to tear me down, but the town had built me back up. The power was not with them anymore. It was with the truth. What would my children do now that the whole town was against them? My son slammed his fist. "You're destroying us!" But the crowd had already decided who was destroying whom. After the neighbours spoke, the room was a loud mess of people talking. My son, Daniel, was screaming. "She's lying! She's a liar!" he yelled. He slammed his fist down on a chair. "You're destroying us!" he shouted, his face red. But no one was listening to him. The crowd was looking at him with disgust. They saw his anger, and they saw his wife, Sarah, hiding behind him, and they saw me standing there, quiet but strong. The town had already made up its mind. I wasn't destroying them. They were destroying themselves. They had spent years trying to erase me, and I had just shown them that I was real and that my pain was real. They were just so angry because they had lost control. They had lost the power. My son had been a quiet boy, but now he was a yelling man, and it was all out in the open. The silence was gone. The whispers were gone. There was just a big loud fight, and I was in the middle of it. But for the first time I wasn't scared. I was fighting back. What would happen when he realised his yelling was only making things worse? When another mother cried out, "She speaks for all of us," the hall erupted in applause. The room was loud with my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah's, shouting. My friends, Margaret and Joyce, were trying to tell them to be quiet, but they wouldn't listen. My son kept yelling about how I was ruining their lives. Then, a woman in the front row, a mother with a sad face, stood up. She looked at me, and then she looked at my children. "She speaks for all of us," she cried out. Her voice was strong and full of tears. The whole hall went quiet for a second, and then it was like a fire. The whole room erupted in applause. People were clapping and they were cheering. They weren't cheering for me as Mrs. Miller. They were cheering for the woman who finally had the courage to tell the truth. I felt my eyes fill with tears. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a story for every person in that room who had ever felt forgotten. I looked at my children, and their faces were full of shock. They had lost. The truth had won. What would they do now that they knew the whole town was against them? I faced my children, saying, "You cannot erase me. Not here, not today." The applause was still loud. I looked at my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah. They looked so small, so lost, in the middle of the big room. The power was not with them anymore. The power was with me. I took a deep breath, and I walked off the stage. I walked right up to my son. He looked at me with anger and shame. "This is not what I wanted," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "This is what you made me do. You chose to make me invisible. You chose to forget me." He didn't say anything. He couldn't. "You cannot erase me," I said, looking him in the eyes. "Not here, not today." I looked at his wife, Sarah. She looked at the floor. My words had a new kind of power. They were no longer the words of a sad widow. They were the words of a woman who had fought for her life. The room was watching us. My son and I. His betrayal was not a secret anymore. It was out in the open. And with the whole town watching, there was nothing he could do. What would he do now that he had lost all his power and I had all of mine? For the first time, they had no defense. Only lowered eyes as the crowd's applause thundered. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah had screamed. They had threatened, they had lied. But as the neighbours stood up and told the truth, they became quiet. The yelling stopped. The whole hall was clapping for me, and I was just standing there looking at them. My son looked at his shoes. His wife Sarah looked at the ground. Their faces were red with shame, and they couldn't say a word. They had no defence. They had no more lies to tell. The truth was out, and the whole town knew. Their betrayal was no longer a secret. It was a fact. I felt a little bit of pity for them. They had spent so much time trying to hide, and now they were caught. The power was so completely in my hands. The applause kept going, and they just stood there, so small and so quiet. They had lost. What would they do now that they had nothing left to say? A stranger placed flowers in my hands, for the mother they forgot, but we never will. The applause finally stopped. I was just standing there, looking at my son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, when a woman from the back of the room walked up to me. She was a complete stranger. She had a bouquet of flowers in her hands, beautiful pink roses, just like the ones my daughter-in-law, Sarah, had given to the neighbour. The woman looked at me with tears in her eyes. She gave me the flowers. "For the mother they forgot," she said, her voice shaking. "But we never will." My heart felt so full. It was the kindness I had been looking for so long. The roses felt so soft in my hands. They were a symbol of all the love and kindness I had lost. But now, it wasn't just my son's roses that mattered. It was all the flowers, all the love, all the kindness I had found from strangers. My son, Daniel, and his wife Sarah had taken so much from me, but the town had given me so much back. It was not a small feeling. It was a big, beautiful feeling. What would it feel like to be a mother to a whole town? I realized I no longer needed their recognition. I already had my own. I stood on the stage, the flowers in my hands. My son Daniel and his wife Sarah were gone. They had left the hall in the middle of the applause. They had run away from the truth. But I wasn't sad. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. I had been so worried about what they thought of me. I had wanted their love, their attention, their recognition. But now I had something better. I had the recognition of a whole town. I had the love of strangers who had become my family. My friends, Margaret, Joyce, and Betty, came up to the stage and gave me a big hug. My story was no longer a story of pain. It was a story of hope. I didn't need my son and his wife to tell me I was a good mother. I knew I was. And so did everyone else. They had tried to erase me, but all they did was make me stronger. My voice had not only set me free, but it had freed others too. And now I was ready to start a new life. A life where I was not just a forgotten widow, but a strong woman who had found her own way. What would my new life look like? And would I ever see my son and his wife again? The entire gathering stood in ovation, justice sealed not in words but in witness. I was still standing on the stage, the beautiful pink roses in my hand. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, had run away, and the town hall was filled with the sound of applause. It wasn't just a few people clapping, it was everyone. The whole room had stood up. I looked out at all the faces and I saw so much love and support. I saw women with tears in their eyes and men with strong nods of respect. It was like a wave of kindness, and it washed over me, taking away all the pain and loneliness. The town was not just on my side. They were my side. They had become my family. They had become the people I could count on. My children had tried to erase me, but the town had written me a new story, a story of strength, of courage, of community. The betrayal was still real, but it was no longer my whole story. It was just the first chapter. And now I had a whole new life to live. What would this new life be like? Family is not just blood. It's who stands with you when the world looks away. The applause finally stopped. I looked out at all the kind faces, and my heart was so full. I leaned into the microphone one last time. I didn't have a plan, but the words just came to me. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for listening to me, for believing me, for standing with me." My voice was strong. My children, Daniel and Sarah, they chose to forget me, but you all chose to remember me, and in my heart I know the truth. I took a deep breath. Family is not just blood, it's who stands with you when the world looks away. The words were so true. My family had turned their backs on me, but these strangers, these wonderful people, had taken me in. They had given me a new kind of love. The kind of love that made me feel safe. The kind of love that made me feel strong. My pain was not just mine anymore, it was a part of our town's story. And the love I had found was the most beautiful thing of all. What did my future hold now that I had found a new family? When I returned home, applause still ringing in my ears, I found a sealed envelope with no name. Inside, a single line: "You don't know the whole truth about him." I walked home from the town hall, the cheers and applause still in my ears. The street was quiet, but I wasn't lonely. I had my new friends walking with me. We said our goodbyes at my front door and I went inside. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a peaceful quiet, a happy quiet. I went to put my keys on the table, and that's when I saw it. A sealed white envelope, with no name on it, just sitting on my front doorstep. My heart started to beat faster. Who had left this? I opened it, my hands shaking. Inside there was a single piece of paper, and on it was one line of writing. "You don't know the whole truth about him." There was no name, just that one sentence. I read it again and again. The blood ran cold in my veins. Him. Who was him? Was it my son, Daniel? Or was it my husband, Robert? I thought about the reporter's questions, about the secrets my husband had kept. The peace I had just found was gone. A new secret had found me. What was the truth about him? And who was trying to tell me? Was the fight not over after all?